Hey everybody, it's your girl Tawana B back with Not Your Normal Conversation. And now I'm here with Dr. Brashani Reece. Brashani Reece, how are you?
I am so excited because I'm here with you.
And likewise, right? I'm thinking that I should be the one that should be excited to be in your presence. So I thank you again, as I said on our last interview. I appreciate you and all that you're trying to do for community, for formerly and currently incarcerated people. And again, I stand with you. I always do. So we're going to get right into it because you're a spitfire, really. You have a lot to share with the community that I think is important for everyone to hear. So we won't waste any time getting into any of the formalities. They already know who you are. They know who I am to want to be and not your normal conversation. So let's go.
Great.
So this segment is called, you want to end LWOP, and you speak openly about this and how it's a second death penalty.
Yes.
And I just want you to explain to the listeners exactly why you're so passionate about this and ending LWOP and about it being a death penalty. Explain that to us.
There's so many reasons, Tawana. It's almost hard to where to start. The first thing that I would say is that most Americans do not know about the existence of life without parole, which is what LWOP stands for, or other what we refer to as death in prison or death by incarceration sentencing. Absolutely. Which can include 25 years to life. Even if you have the possibility of parole, you still can die in prison depending on the age of sentencing, depending on the state with the parole system. You can also have what we call a virtual life sentence, which is if you are 30 years old, then you are sentenced to, and this is real, 550 years. Then that judge was just trying to make a point, right? They didn't give you LWOP, but they wanted to make sure you never came out ever again.
Right.
So why am I passionate about life without parole? First, I would say life without parole is in many ways more cruel and inhumane than the death penalty. And what I mean by that is when you are sentenced in a capital punishment case, you have a lot of legal options actually to fight your sentence. You get access to a lot of appeals. You often have more access to attorneys, a lot of chances to get that sentence commuted, a lot of chances to basically never die. It's also a lot faster if you are sentenced to die and that day comes and then you are executed. Life without parole says that you are irredeemable and that you will never have another chance. And here's the tomb in which we are going to place you. And now every day that you wake up, you are just wondering when is the day that you're actually going to die. And so it's even if you don't agree with whether or not it's like more cruel and inhumane, what I would say is like, well, when we try to judge these things, what is more cruel and inhumane? I don't know, like the choice between like dying by, an injection, which is horrifying for most of us to think about or imagine, or just like waiting until you age and die in a place filled with violence and trauma and hate and all of these other things. Why am I? So that's the kind of the start of why I'm against life without parole. But we'll get into some of the other reasons why it also doesn't make sense.
Right, because I'm going to be the devil's advocate.
Go for it. Yeah.
Society, people who have lost loved ones to someone who has life without parole would say or would think, why does she even care? They killed my father, my sister, my brother. Why do I have to care about whether they rot in jail? Because that's exactly what I want them to do. And if society says that, or if the justice system says that we're irredeemable and we can't be redeemed, then what difference does it make if LWOP exists or not?
Yes, that's an often taken devil's advocate stance. And I have a few responses. The first thing that I would talk about is our criminal justice system as a whole is not justice. It is passive, what I refer to as passive justice. It's the watching of a clock.
Absolutely.
So there's no accountability. That person could actually serve an entire life sentence and never breathe a word of accountability. They don't ever have to sit and think about what they did. So many people think like, you go and you sit and think about what you did.
Right.
And that is not what happens. That is not what happens.
It's not what happens.
Exactly. So that's the first thing I point out, is that our justice system is an active process, a passive process rather, and
Right.
therefore not actually justice, because it's not a process of accountability or transformation.
Okay.
The second thing that I would point out is that it's actually a myth that the only stereotype or the archetype of a survivor is that they want somebody to rot in prison.
Okay.
So what's interesting to me is that our justice system will execute people or sentence them to LWOP in the name of the survivor. But when there are survivors who call for something else, our system ignores them. So you can't have it both ways. If you put the survivor at the center of what it is that we're doing, then you truly have to put them at the center. You don't just get to put them at the center when they are in an acute stage of grief and loss and rage, which, by the way, is incredibly complicated and is probably going to change over the course of a person's life.
Absolutely.
So you're taking this individual who committed this act of violence and you're freezing that moment in the name of justice. And you're saying this behavior is now frozen in this scene forever. And then you're going to take the survivor's experience of acute rage, which is understandable, grief, loss, all of that, and you're actually freezing it for them as well. So now we have a trauma and a horrible thing that has happened, and let's just freeze it for everybody. No growth, no healing, no accountability, no change. And that's going to be the way it is for the rest of our lives. That is not justice, nor does it serve anybody's like best interest. And even if you look at it from a numbers perspective, right? So if most homicide cases go unsolved, and you take the homicide cases that are solved, and you take the percentage of the survivors who want that person to rot in prison, you're actually then giving a lot of power to a very small group of individuals. So why would we then treat all incarcerated people who've been sentenced to life sentences the same way based on this 15% or this 20% of individuals, again, frozen in this time? Because if you ask a survivor how they feel right now versus how they feel in 15 years, you're often going to get a different response. And so it is a myth that survivors just want, that's all they want, is this primitive revenge.
Of course. So if you're saying let's end life without parole, what are you suggesting in its place? Because as you can see, it's something that has been in existence since I've been around. And it seems like they're not looking for a way to ever end it. So if you're saying, okay, let's end LWOP, what do you suppose that they would do if somebody commits an act of violence, kills somebody? What does the justice system do with them then?
Oh, Tawana, that's an amazing question. And can I just say that as human beings at our core, we are resilient, we are creative, we are built to heal, and we are built to transform, and we are built to make progress, not only as individuals, but as a society. Ending life without parole, and what do we do in its place? Oh my gosh, the work that could be done in its place is so incredible. And this is one of the ways in which restorative justice really comes into play. And I've realized that in our conversation so far today, we haven't really talked to the audience about what restorative justice is.
Please do.
So just a little, kind of like to sum it up. Okay. So restorative justice is not a program. I want to be very clear about that. It is not a program that was designed by mental health clinicians. It's not one of these things that is kind of like a fabricated, thing. Restorative justice goes all the way back to indigenous populations, and it's a practice of accountability and transformation, where when a harm has been done, the idea is not that that person should be exiled, is that they have harmed an entire community, not just the sole survivors of their offense. And therefore something needs to be done to basically bring the fabric of the community back together and mend the fabric. when we ask survivors what they would want in in the place of a life without parole sentence, oftentimes what I hear is individuals talking about how they want this person to make a commitment to lead the rest of their lives in honor and in tribute and in basically devoting your entire life to showing that you understand the level of the harm that you have done.
Okay.
And that you are then required as an individual to do the transformational work to become a different person. Now, people sometimes think that that sounds really easy and really soft.
And how do they ever see it? How do people who are asking for it ever see it if the person is still incarcerated?
Well, so this is, a core component of restorative justice is that people who have done the crime also sit in spaces with the people who are the survivors.
Absolutely.
They don't have to be the direct survivor, right? Because that's not always helpful.
Right.
But they are forced to come face to face with what they have done, not just in a philosophical, intellectual sort of way,
Absolutely.
but in the eyes and the body language and the hard work of sitting across from somebody who has lost a loved one to violence.
Right.
And for many incarcerated people in that experience, they have told me, I've gone 20 years being incarcerated and never felt true remorse or true accountability for what I've done. And then the second I heard that mother open her mouth and tearfully say, like, please explain to me what you were thinking when this happened. Like, why is it that you did this? And even though these words, they're not the thing that brings total healing and total closure, but they are something so much better than just disappearing somebody into the black tar pit, which is prison.
But why not? I'm being the devil's advocate now. So
why not?
Why not? I mean, they've taken somebody's life.
Yes.
And the person that's gone can never come back. So society asked the question, why not? Why should they come back out to do the same thing? Because look at the Jeffrey Dahmers. And I was just thinking about this because people think like this. Look at all the people who go out and kill lots of people, like rape them and kill them or whatever they do to them. Do they deserve this same chance of ending LWOP? Or are you saying that this is on a case-by-case basis?
So first off, I want to say that the Jeffrey Dahmers and things like that are often a red herring in this argument against life without parole. Absolutely. So when we talk recidivism and whether or not somebody is likely to commit homicide again, the chances of that as a person ages are incredibly small.
They say age out. Yes.
Yeah. So one of the reasons that we're pushing to end mass incarceration is because there actually is a point in which everybody, whether it's homicide or another violent offense, everyone becomes pretty much like non-dangerous anymore to the community. So we're spending billions of dollars keeping people incarcerated when our resources are really strapped. So we're spending billions of dollars to keep these people incarcerated, but they've actually are way beyond dangerous to our society anymore. So when Americans think of like the Jeffrey Dahmers, the serial killers, I would push back and say that is a lot of media, that is a lot of sensationalized cases, and we're talking about 0.0001% of the population. So why would we ever design a justice system around that small of a number?
Okay, and I could agree with you. So you are very big on second chances. You are.
Oh yeah.
And because of that, do you believe that everyone deserves a second chance? And if so, why? Because that's what society is asking. That's what many people are asking. Why?
Yeah. Well, the first thing I want to say to that is that we're actually an anomaly in the world. So what I mean by that is our perception of what justice is in terms of locking people up for the rest of their lives is really out of step with the rest of the civilized, industrialized, our peers that are in the world. Judges in many, in the European unions, for instance, LWOP is not allowed. And that's because judges have said that's inhumane. that denies a person their dignity, and it denies the core belief that human beings are capable of changing. Are you the same person you were 20 years ago? No, none of us are.
No.
So the question of why, you know, when people say like, well, why should they get a second chance? Why? They should have. Well, guess what? There are a lot of things that I should have done differently in my life. And there are a lot of things that I could look back on and have a lot of regret. But all I have is what's ahead of me.
Absolutely.
You know, and actually it's really kind of a myth to think like people should have thought ahead of what it is that they were doing, especially since the majority of like people who are coming into the system are young. Absolutely. And we know that brain development happens, you know, at 25 or 26. Mm-hmm. So when people say that capital punishment or LWOP or any sort of life sentence should be a deterrent, there's a couple of things that you're assuming there that are fallacies of logic. So the first thing is
Dr. Brashani, I'm sorry, I have to interject. Does that mean you're saying they're fallacies as far as statistics and studies show, or are you saying they're fallacies as far as your opinion?
Fallacies as far as logic.
Okay.
So when you think about logical thinking, right? When you think about sort of like this very like ordered, well, if this and then this equals this. So if you take life without parole as a deterrent, right? Which nothing in our criminal justice system is a deterrent. No research has ever shown that sentencing is a deterrent. So if you take LWOP as a deterrent, you are assuming, one, that the individual knew about the existence of LWOP, which if you're 20 years old, 21 years old, you probably don't know that LWOP exists. Right. So there's the first, like, kind of the foundation, like, gone. That doesn't make sense, right? Okay. So if it's a deterrent, that means that the individual was aware of it. If they're not aware of it, then it's not a deterrent. And then the second part is, even if they're aware of it, you are asking somebody who is about to commit an act of violence, who is probably not thinking very clearly, whether it's because of substances or disordered thinking, or they're in a gang culture or whatever it is. You're then asking that person who is acting irrationally to be rational. So now those are the two components, right? If the deterrence is going to work, those are the two core components. So if you have a 21-year-old who is not thinking clearly, and anybody who's about to commit murder is not thinking clearly. I hope we can all agree, you know, that's the case. And so then it can't be a deterrent. So then again, like, why the extreme sentencing?
So you say extreme sentencing.
Yes.
Right. Do you think, you say that they should end LWOP, and this is a big deal for you. Like it's a huge deal for you. So life without parole, death in prison, execution, they all equal the same thing, death, right? Whether it's by lethal injection or whether it's by old age or something that happens in prison where a person dies. But the bottom line is, in Massachusetts, there's no death penalty.
Right.
So to give somebody life without parole is giving them the death penalty because they'll die in jail.
Correct.
Right.
Yes.
So I just wanted to clarify that, and I knew that you would be on board with that, because it is very true where we do not have a death penalty, but we have people who have natural life sentences who will die inside of jail, and it's just another name for death penalty.
And in Massachusetts, it's a mandatory. So if you're convicted, and in many states, if you're convicted of first degree, which is premeditated murder, then no judge or jury has an alternative to that sentence. If they
Absolutely.
convict you, then that's it. It's LWOP. And so like in states like California, for instance, oftentimes juries will be faced with the beautiful decision. And of course, I'm being sarcastic.
Right.
Oh, should we execute them, or should we just sentence them to psychological and emotional torture for the rest of their lives?
Well, society says, hey, why not?
Well, and on that point, some numbers for you, right?
Okay.
So if you take the cost of incarcerating a person, right? So let's go back to scarce resources. So even if we have this very primitive moral, biblical eye for an eye reaction. We're like, you took a life, you die. Like that's essentially what we're saying, right? It's very eye for an eye. Even if we have that initial reaction, it is very worthwhile to think about the cost. So I'm a taxpayer, right? And maybe I want some of these incarcerated people to come home because you know what? They should be working and helping to support our society and helping to support their families.
Right.
But instead, if we take an individual who in the state of Massachusetts, let's say it's like $80,000 a year, and it varies from state to state. Let's say $80,000 a year for one individual.
Yeah.
That's one person. Somebody who has done 20 years, when you do the math, that means we have already paid $3 million for that person to be incarcerated for 20 years. Let's say that person went in at 20, which is that's a statistical normal, right? That's normal. So 3 million for them to get to 41, age 21 to 41 or 20 to 40. Now let's pay another, let's say that he lives out his life because he's healthy and he manages to take care of himself somehow in a system that basically makes it impossible for you to take care of yourself. Right. Let's say they live to 70. So now we're talking $6 million per person. So when I hear somebody who works in the DOC who has a lot of disdain for incarcerated people, which is common, and they'll say things like, I can't believe this individual is getting an education in here when I have to pay for my child to have an education.
They do.
So let me be very clear. That person is getting an education because we need them to come home and be a different person. Absolutely. And we need them to come home and pay taxes. And we need them to come home and be a responsible member of society. And then that person will say, well, it's my tax money that is going towards that programming. I'll say, okay, it's your tax money going towards, let's see, $2 million versus $6 million. Right. And why on earth could we not see the difference between that? Why on earth would we look at that and say, oh, that makes sense to me. Let me spend $6 million per person as opposed to 2. Wow.
For once, I'm speechless. And not because I've been inside of a jail cell, not because of any of that. I think I still have the same heart. I was born with this heart. I was born to help people. I believe I did some things along the way that kind of deterred me from getting to ultimately to where God wanted me to be and needed me to be, which is here right now. But I also think that with me having this same heart and having compassion for people, I am, and you know this, I'm with somebody whose daughter was murdered.
Yes.
And he's up for parole. And we often have conversations about this. And he has a hard time with it and had a hard time with understanding kind of my position and where I stood in all of this. I stand for anything that's right. And I've never lost a child. I've never lost anybody in my family that I know of to being murdered at the hands of somebody else. I've had friends, I've had people that I know of, but it's never been a part of my life, somebody so close to me having this happen. So I really can't say how I would respond if it were me, if this was my daughter or if this was my son and something happened to them. Now I'm standing on the other side and I have to figure out, because I've been to jail before, what it's like. Sometimes people are shocked when I say, you sending somebody to jail, but it's actually not going to work.
Correct.
It's not going to work. Trust me. I've been there 7 times and it just doesn't work. Because the components of inside of a prison are missing. Like a whole bunch of things are missing. Health, just a lot of different things. So I understand this more by talking to you about it, but just wanting our listeners to understand, and it's not even if they agree with you, because they may not. Shoot, I don't know if I agree with you.
Yep.
I do know that you bring some numbers to the table, you have some statistics, you have some studies, is more than what we can say when we say that this shouldn't be happening. We have nothing to back it up, but that nobody should get out of jail if they committed a violent crime. That's all we can say, because that's our feeling.
Right.
But we're not going off of numbers. We're not going off of statistics. We're not going off of people who, like Sean Ellis, who has spent so many years behind bars, and the effect it has on one's mental health, one's emotional health, how they will live on the outside because they've been in for so long, it breaks you down.
Right. And I want to add to that, that even though I lead with the statistics and I lead with the numbers and I lead with the logic, if I believe that if everyone in this country could see what I have seen
Right.
through restorative justice, they would be moved. I tell people that as a spiritual person, I became more spiritual once I saw the miracles that happen in those spaces.
Right.
Because I have seen men for the first time in 30 years take accountability for what they've done, when the whole time they were maintaining their innocence.
Right.
And the thing that brought them to that place was hearing a survivor for the first time. I have seen transformation, and I have seen survivors heal in those spaces. They have used those words with me. They have said, this brought me healing and closure that the justice system could never deliver.
And so for conviction. That's
right.
it.
So if we really are survivor centered, you know, I go back to my original point that actually that's a heart-centered place to be. And that a lot of the resources that we save on incarcerating people should absolutely go to the survivors. They lose their jobs during court cases because they're too emotionally distressed. Many of them are diagnosed with PTSD or suffer tremendous mental health from the grief and loss that they're going through. There is a lot that survivors need. Why on earth would we just use them as tools in a court case to get a conviction and then be like, done? And when I did restorative justice training, there was a woman who was there, and you know, I won't mention her name or anything or the specifics really of the case because it's too sensitive. But she was a survivor and she had lost her husband.
Wow.
And she explained it to me that it was like after being used by the prosecutor to get a death penalty conviction. She said everybody was there with her while she was spitting fire, while she was spitting hatred and venom and saying, execute him, execute the mother, you know, like just like really going in because she was in such traumatic grief and loss or whatever. She found herself 5 years later, not recovered at all. In fact, she had fallen into alcoholism. She wasn't taking care of her kids, all these other things. And what she explained to me was everybody abandoned her after the court case because now it was done.
Right.
But her nightmare was just beginning. So again, sentencing that man to die, what did that accomplish for her? And now she's in communication with the man on death row, and she's actually fighting to get his case overturned. Why? Because she understands him now, and she has found her own process of her own, again, it's specific to the survivor, but her process of healing from the grief and loss involved asking him those hard questions. Why did you kill my husband? I need to hear something.
That speaks
right?
volumes to forgiveness.
Yeah.
Too. Because for someone to be in that position, it speaks volumes to forgiveness. And I have to say that society is not very forgiving. We are a bunch of people who are like, crucify him. Nope, they did it. Just send them to jail. It'd be much easier. Communities would be much safer. But what about when they get out? So what is the end goal? I believe that there should be something else. It has to be something else besides just, okay, let's go to jail. You get out, and now we expect you to be productive members of society. We expect you to do everything by the book, no problems, even though you can't get a job because you got a quarry.
Right.
Even though society may already know something about your case because you probably were in the media. Even though you have no family, because your family, if it's not your first time, they turn their back on you. So you have nothing to hold on to. So you resort back to what you know, and you're right back to square one again. And this is what they bank on.
Yeah.
Because
it doesn't make sense.
I often would say this, and I would make the comparison, and I have to be quite honest with anybody that's listening. They're the pimps and we're the hoes. Whenever we go to jail, they're making money off of our body. That's it. They give us the bare necessities, and they don't care about anything else. And I understand change definitely starts within you, but when you're around people that you're watching people commit suicide, when you're watching all of those things take place, it's very hard to recover, because if you went in just a little bit sane, you're not coming out the same way.
No.
I recommend mental health therapy for anybody getting out of jail, even if they're there for one day, because it is a lot. So
Right.
it brings me to this question for you, in your professional opinion, because we know you speak with your whole heart. So I'm asking you, in your professional opinion, do you believe rehabilitation works for everyone, or different circumstances for different offenses? Or does that even matter?
It's not the offense that matters. And the reason that I say that is because we are disproportionately connected to what we call in this state the index offense.
Okay.
So when our parole board tries to assess whether or not somebody is able to come home, there is this intense focus on the index offense. But according to psychological research, the index offense is not an indicator of what a person is going to do in the future. Just because the severity of a crime happened when somebody was 21 is not an indicator of whether or not they're going to do that same thing at 40. It's just not. And based on everything we've already talked about, it's actually less likely, right? So I believe in rehabilitation and personal transformation. And I also believe that we're all unique. We're incredibly unique snowflakes. And finding the right combination for the person means working with the circumstances and, most importantly, the individual and the survivor. Because again, if we come back to this idea of a survivor-centered type of approach to justice, and if we come to this agreement as a society that a social contract has been broken, when violence has been committed, a social contract has been broken. If we're not going to execute this person, everything less than death, we act as if there's some sort of moral judgment attached to it. But I would challenge us to say, God did not give us when a person commits murder,
Right.
Here's what is their like justified sentence, and if we can all agree that murder is wrong, whether it's the state executing a person, or another person killing a person, if we take homicide of all forms off the table, we are then left in some very murky territory, because now human beings are attempting to figure out what is justice for other human beings. So I believe that rehabilitation and personal transformation can be a very individualized process, but that requires us to do something different. And first and foremost, we have to get the money situation sorted out here and take all of the resources that we're pouring into prisons. Oh my God, their budgets get bigger every year. What on earth are you doing? Take those resources and get them in the right places. And for anyone who's listening and says like, well, the Department of Corrections needs all of that money because they have to protect us or this, that, whatever. No, protection, public safety is not found by incarcerating people. That is not how it is found. And we already know this.
Right.
We have to do something different across the board. And transformation should always be the key, always.
And I agree with you wholeheartedly, but I also have to say this,
Yeah.
as a formerly incarcerated woman, there were a lot of times, like I said, I did watch Sean Ellis's Netflix series, and I was upset. I was upset because there were times where I went to jail and I knew that I had done the wrong thing, and that maybe that was where I was supposed to be at the time. I mean, it didn't really slow me down. And I had a psychologist say the same thing that you said. You'll age out of this. And I started past that age and I was still going to jail.
Yeah.
So I don't really know if those numbers really add up for everybody, because everybody is wired differently.
Sure.
But after watching that Netflix series last night, I had to say to myself, my God, he did absolutely nothing and he goes to jail. And I have escaped common notorious thief, which is a life sentence, twice already. And at that point, I knew that it was God sparing me, but more importantly, I said, maybe I should have gotten it. And if I did, maybe rightfully so. Those were my thoughts yesterday and the day before as I'm watching this Netflix series. And I just, it wasn't even that I couldn't forgive myself. I'm saying, my God, people's lives are being taken away by this life sentence, and juries and judges and the justice system and the way it's built and all the corruption that goes on. So I believe you're onto something when you're saying, let's go deeper than scratching the surface. with ending life without
I challenge our society
parole. Right.
to harness all of our creativity, our intelligence, our compassion, but you don't just need the compassion and the empathy if you just come at it from a democracy standpoint. If you just come at it from an American attitude of that we all can change, we all can make something of ourselves, we can all do better, then that inherently asks us as Americans to do something different than simply let people rot in a cell for the rest of their lives.
Absolutely. And I agree with you. I absolutely agree with you. And again, I don't think every conversation means that you say, I agree with somebody. Because as I said, I was playing the devil's advocate, but honestly, as a human being, I'm asking myself, if this was my son or my daughter, how would I respond to this? What would I want from the justice system to make me feel whole? What I realize is victims don't feel whole by the justice system.
Correct.
And
Exactly.
I know this because I've had many victims from my own personal experience. Although they were non-violent offenses, according to the justice system, people were out a lot of money, and they figured, oh, the banks are insured, this is insured, but people now come to this space where they don't trust people because of what I may have done to them.
Right.
So is it really the justice system that can make them whole? Or maybe is it them saying, why did you choose me? What did I do to you? And do you even know me to even think that what you did was okay?
Right.
I think those are the bigger questions. And I think that victims do need to be made whole. I do believe that they need to be made whole. Something happens to them, they need answers. And it's not coming from the justice system. It's actually coming from the person who did it.
Can I share a personal story with you?
Absolutely.
So in 2009, I was living with my boyfriend at the time, and we had a very tumultuous relationship. The long and short of it is, one night we got into an argument, and he put me in a chokehold and attempted to make me lose consciousness. When I did not lose consciousness, he went to the bedroom closet and retrieved a gun. And when he came back and he put the gun to my head and he said, now you're going to do what I tell you to do. After that all unfolded, my, trusted closest friends who I disclosed this situation to, they told me to go to the police, and I was now scared of this individual and I did not want to be with him anymore. And, we were living together. And so there was a lot of fear. I went to the police because I didn't know what else to do. He was charged, and actually, because the prosecutor wanted to get the most out of the situation, they charged him with attempted murder because they wanted to force him, which is very common in the criminal justice system. They wanted to force him to negotiate and to take a plea. They wanted him to do time. I'll never forget as he was being taken away when they first, arrested him to get him out of the home, which, that I get it. It's an acute situation. You have to separate us, whatever. But this is, 11 years ago now. I said to the police officer, when can I visit my boyfriend? And he said, you can't visit him. And I was like, what are you talking about? Like, he's my boyfriend. I was like, I don't think we're going to be together anymore, but we need to have a conversation. And I need to ask him, like, what was he thinking when he tried to choke me out? I was having visions of my life flashing before my eyes. I thought I was going to die. Right. And I never got to have that conversation with him. I was then informed that as a survivor, I had no rights to actually go and see him or visit him, and I couldn't have any communication with him. And all I could do was think about how we were both very traumatized young individuals at that point, and it had been a mutual argument. And I understand that he committed violence and that separates us. I get it. However, we were both very hurt and scared and distressed. And in a way, even though we would have ended up ending our relationship because that's not okay, I needed to hear from him that he was sorry. I needed to hear those sentiments, right? Not only was I told I couldn't visit him, but then when I asked the prosecutor, like, Well, what's the alternative? I don't want him to go to prison. It was 2 minutes, Tawana. It was 2 minutes of our lives. That was it. 2 minutes. And so I asked the prosecutor what the alternative was, and she practically laughed at me. There's no alternative. And then she went on to inform me that they were going to charge him whether or not I agreed. She was like, and just in case you're thinking, that you don't want to testify or blah, 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 we're going to charge him whether or not. And they were even considering taking him to federal court for the gun. And I was like, what is happening? So so when people say like, oh, Dr. Reece, so yeah, what is she, an academic, blah, 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 blah. Not only am I a survivor, but I'm also like, I have some experience with, as a traumatized young person, committing acts of violence myself and being a part of some pretty bad things myself. The point that I try to make with that story is that I didn't know it at the time, but I was looking for restorative justice. I was looking to have a sit-down conversation with him, and I did not want him to go to prison. That is not what I wanted. But I wanted to know that he understood that he scared me, and that on some level, he changed me. He permanently left a mark on me. And for several years afterwards, I was diagnosed with PTSD because I had night terrors. I couldn't sleep. I kept waking up, not being able to breathe because I was holding my breath, right? That's like a long-winded thing, but I just want viewers to understand that oftentimes when people are passionate about this stuff, it comes from a place of experience. It's not just this esoteric, philosophical, we should do something different. It is like, I asked for something different and I was denied something different.
Dr. Brashani, do you have any parting words for all the listeners?
I know I talk a lot, Tawana.
No, as far as what you want them to know, because they heard a lot of things today. But what is the one thing that you really want to resonate with the people who are listening and who will listen?
That life without parole and other life sentences do not make sense on any level. Financially, societally, emotionally, they accountability wise, like a sense of justice, they make no sense, and they eat up our resources, and they potentially deny many survivors any sense of accountability or justice. It is not just.
Dr. Brashani Reece, thank you for being here today. And I say doctor all the time. If you notice, even in our messages, I say it, I'm proud of you. And so I say it because it should be used very often. It's an honor, and it's about respect. So, I definitely salute you, Dr. Reece, because I believe that, again, everyone has an opinion. You have the right to yours. The only thing is that society sometimes has their opinion based on what they hear. Yours is based on what you know. And you're just trying to give this information to other people so that when they're basing their opinion, or if they're saying, I stand firm in this, that they know that there's more than one avenue that they could take in order for this to make sense. So I thank you for your time. I continue to stand with you, work with you. Now that you're going to be sitting on my board of directors for a normal conversation, I thank you for being a part of my journey, but also allowing me to be a part of yours, because there's just some things that I learned about you tonight or this afternoon that I didn't know prior to our conversation. And I think it wasn't just for me to hear back then. I think it was for me to hear right now, for our listeners to hear, so that they can understand that you're not just a woman who's a doctor who has statistics, but you've lived a lot of things, and it may not look like it, because what does trauma look like, and what does convicted felons look like, and what does formerly incarcerated people look like, and what does wrongfully convicted people look like? One would never know. So I thank you for your time. I appreciate you. Stay tuned, you guys, because I'm going to bring her back in a couple of months to see how LWOP is doing and how far she's got and what it looks like to her, as opposed to today and months from now. Thank you guys for tuning in to Now You Know How to